Hi, welcome to episode 3 of What Lives in My Yard. This week, a swarm of dragonflies invaded my backyard. We'll show you that swarm, the dragonfly I caught, and we'll even show you how to identify a dragonfly species. You'll find out whether or not dragonflies are dangerous. Do they sting? Do they bite? Stay tuned and find out. Moths tend to be seasonal, so we're getting as many as we can while the weather's good. Our light trap from episode 1 is still working. We get a lot of repeats, but here are some new ones. The two-lined hook-tip moth is known as both Drapana bilineata and Falcaria bilineata. This can sometimes happen if a second capture is not recognized as belonging to an already named species, so a new name is assigned. Later, when the confusion is cleared up, they'll be called synonyms, the older original name taking precedence. The hollow-spotted plagiodus, which often rests with its abdomen pointing upward. Often wing patterns are good enough to identify a moth from a single photo, but there are occasions where you just can't tell. They're either so close or almost identical, so you need to go further and either dissect them or look at specific individual details. Unfortunately, I didn't know that at the time I photographed this one, so I did not collect a sample. So it's going to have to remain Xanthotype species undetermined. In my first episode, I estimated I might find 500 or even 1,000 different species of animals in my yard. I think I might have underestimated by a lot. One of the great things about living in the temperate forest is the seasonality. So things change from month to month, even from week to week and day to day. We might have insects that are only in adult form for 1 week a year. And if you don't find them during that week, you're not going to find them. So when a swarm of dragonflies comes through your yard, you've got to act. By now you've probably heard about the dragonfly swarm in Rhode Island in August of 2024, and you may have seen the videos. Recently I had a similar dragonfly swarm in my own backyard. During the Rhode Island beach dragonfly swarm, people were running and screaming and panicking, but there's no need to be afraid of adult dragonflies. Dragonflies do not have stingers, and these agile flyers will do everything they can to avoid bumping into you. Although the dragonfly's mouth parts are capable of biting you, and it'll be a little pinch if it does, they generally will not bite you, unless you're holding it in a way that's causing it pain and allows its mouth parts to reach your skin. If you want to hold a dragonfly for a closer look without hurting it or giving it the chance to bite you, the proper way to hold a dragonfly without injuring it is to fold its wings upward into a vertical position relative to its body, not fold the wings, but pull them both up straight so that the left and the right side wings are touching, and then hold the wings between the thumb and index finger near the wingtips. If you try to hold the wings of just one side of its body, then as it tries to flap, it can cause damage and even tear the wings off. Some dragonflies are notoriously hard to identify the species. They have very minor differences from a lot of similar ones, and you really need a good close look from just the right angle and at just the right parts. To identify these, I knew I'd need to catch one, so I waded into the swarm, knowing that they're harmless. The best way to catch a dragonfly is to use a butterfly net. I didn't have one. The closest I had was a kick net used for collecting samples out of flowing streams. There's a smaller opening and it's not as long. A true butterfly net is very long so that when the butterfly is in the end of the net, you can fold it over so he can't escape when you pick it up, which is exactly what happens on this attempt. So I got one. I have him trapped against the ground. I'm trying to get him into the top of the net. And there he is, and fold it over. Rather than handling him directly, I put him directly into this container. Of the insects that we think of as dragonflies, there are really two different types, dragonflies and damselflies. And they're pretty easy to tell apart, especially if you remember that a dragon has a bigger, thicker body than a thin-bodied damsel. There are some other differences, but we'll hold that for another time. This one is definitely a dragonfly. Once we've decided it's a dragonfly, we need to know which family it belongs to. So there are 7 or 11 families of dragonflies, depending upon how you break down subfamilies, but we'll get into that for another time as well. For now, let us say there are petal-tails, darners, club-tails, spike-tails, cruisers, emerald, and skimmers. During the winter months when there are fewer things to find, we'll go over more of the science and the details on this. For now, let's say you can do a web search with the picture that you've taken and generally get to the family level. We can tell that this is of the darner family and that it has a lot of blue in it. We know that it lives in New Hampshire. Right away we can narrow our search to darners that live in New Hampshire that are primarily blue. It's still quite a list, and some of these are very, very similar. So we need to see the details. But before we can talk about those details, we need to know what to call them. We're going to look at close-up details of the one we caught with labels on all his parts. All insects, of course, have 3 body parts: the head, thorax, and abdomen. The tail is an important section to look at for our identification. First off, we can tell this is a male because it has an epiproc. The shape of the cerci can differ among species, and it's important to get a very good, clear look at that. Different sections of the abdomen, numbered S1 through S10, can have different markings on different species. Right away on this one, we notice that S10 does not have any blue markings. It's all black, which is a distinctive feature of the black-tipped darner, so we have a positive identification. The face also has a lot of distinctive details. Like other insects, this one has 2 compound eyes, but the dragonfly also has 3 extra eyes. These are not compound eyes, but simple eyes called ocelli, or singular ocellus. The ocelli are arranged in a triangle and remind us a little bit of the spider eyes we saw in episode 2. The region below the vertex is called the frons. Below that we have the postclypeus, and below that the anticlypeus. The cross-line suture between the postclypeus and the frons can be darker and thicker in some species. And below the anticlypeus is the labrum, which is a hinged lip, and below that is the mandible. So next, let's take a look at the wings. So the wings alone are a very good clue that this is a dragonfly, not a damselfly. Dragonflies tend to rest with their wings perpendicular to their body, while damselflies tend to draw the wings back almost parallel to the body when they're at rest. Furthermore, with a damselfly, we'd expect the hind wings and the forewings to be approximately the same size. In this one, we can see that the hind wing is much broader than the forewings, and that's an indicator for a dragonfly. There are a few exceptions, particularly within the genus Epiophlebia, but it's a pretty good rule of thumb. Although the black-tipped darner that we're using for our example has clear membranes for its wings, many dragonflies and damselflies have colored membranes, even with pattern. And these are key indicators for species, and in some cases, wing pattern might be all you need. Most notably, the 12-spotted skimmer, like this one I photographed in my yard in 2011. Aside from the patterns and the shapes of the wings, there are other details we can look at as well. The pterostigma. For some species, you may have to go as far as the details of the lacework on the wing, but that's just a few. Fine details of the hamules or of the sex organs at the back of the tail can also help identify. But one of the primary ways to identify a dragonfly is by the color and markings on the thorax and the abdomen, particularly the side of the thorax, these stripes, and on the top of the thorax. This is by no means an exhaustive list of the anatomy of a dragonfly or the parts needed to identify all of them, but it's a good overview. There are some dragonflies that you can easily identify by just seeing them in the wild. Others, you're going to have them in hand and have a close examination or even a magnifying glass to identify them. If you see a dragonfly or even a swarm of dragonflies, there's no need to panic. They're completely harmless, and they're voracious eaters of things like mosquitoes, biting flies, and other insects that they grab right out of the air. Before we add these to our master list, let's take a look at the taxonomy of the black-tipped darner and the 12-spotted skimmer. It's time to check our master list of what lives in my yard. This week, we've added 5 new species. We're up to 12. You can see 10 of them are insects, 1 mammal, and 1 arachnid. So that wraps up episode 3 of What Lives in My Yard. Next week on episode 4, we hope to add 1, maybe 2 new classes of animals to our list. See you then.